Welcome back. And this is your first time here. Welcome um, to Additional Prayers. Just like always, the goal behind the podcast is to help others understand that they're not alone. Also, it is to unify every day with everyday prayer life. The reason behind this episode is to help you understand the different ways wood was used in the Bible. And the title is Simplicity of Nature. The verses will be coming from Genesis 3 and verse 7, Genesis 6, verse 13 through 14, Exodus 7, verse 8 through 10, and we'll have a bonus notes coming from Mark 11, verses 12 through 14, and 19 through 22. We'll be defining words shame, wood, peace, and give you an idea, something to think about while listening to this episode or watching on YouTube. God has a way of using everyday items to help us understand that we need to pay more attention. While writing this episode, it taught me to sit down and pay attention. And that's how I want to help you understand when you're listening to this episode, or if you may be watching this, how you need to sometimes sit down and pay attention. In Genesis 3, verse 7, we'll be talking about the fig leaves. In Genesis 6, verses 13 through 14, we'll be talking about the ark and gopher wood. In Exodus 7, verses 8 through 10, we'll be talking about Aaron and how God turned his rod into a serpent. And then the last bit of verses is actually our bonus verses is coming from Mark 11, and we will be talking about this idea of don't enjoy what everybody else is enjoying. Have a little restraint, if you will. Once again, the words will be defining, or notes as I like to call them. The first one is shame. Shame is defined as something that is painful, arising from conscious of something that may be dishonorable or improper or disgrace, or it also can bring regret. Wood is also known as lumber. Is something suitable for agriculture. Is something that is also known as timber. It can be sawed or split into such as boards, or something that is going to be prepared for market. Peace is an argument or a treaty that has been ended. It can be a agreement between groups. It is something that abstains from future fighting or mutual harmony. Once again, like I said, Genesis 3, verse 7, very familiar passage. In Genesis 3, verse 7, it reads, "And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons." If you're not familiar with this, it's when Adam and Eve had just partaken the fruit from the tree in the Garden of Eden, and the serpent has fooled Eve, and she has partaken of it and given some to Adam, and they both realized that they were sinful. Um, and the idea of the story that they was warned that they they will die, or something bad was going to happen. And my idea is that their innocence was killed. Their and then they was the idea of they have crossed the line and something they cannot go back to. So this is the one illustration, which there are several illustrations in the Bible of different types of wood. And this, like I said, this one deals with the idea of the fig leaves. The fig leaves goes along with the idea of shame. And like I said, shame is defined as something that is dishonorable, or disgraceful, or that can bring regret. And the next set of verses, it comes from Genesis as well. It is Genesis 6, Genesis 6, 13 through 14. 13 reads, "And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." Verse 14 reads, "Make thee an ark of gopher wood, room sought through, make an ark, and shall make pitch it within and without pitch." This is the idea of before, when it came to in Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve have disgraced themselves. And then in Genesis 6, this is the idea of how mankind has upset God, and Noah has been given a task to go and save what he can. And he's building an ark. This is the idea of the gopher wood. And this part, it goes along with the idea of the wood. Once again, is also known as timber. It can be sawed or split into boards, and it's been something that's been prepared. And then this is what he did. He made an ark. He prepared it. God gave him the dimensions and what to do, and Noah was obedient from the idea of following what God had told him to do when it comes to saving the creatures of the earth, because God was fed up with mankind. And the next little bit is Exodus 7, verses 8 through 10, and it reads, "And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, Take thy rod and cast it before the Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent." Verse 10 reads, "And Moses and Aaron went unto the Pharaoh, and they did as the Lord has commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before the Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent." Now, this is the idea of, it goes along with the third note, which is peace. Peace is an agreement or treaty between a group, is attained from further fighting, is in mutual harmony. Now, even though Pharaoh had to take a little bit of convincing to listen to Aaron and Moses, he eventually gave in after a little bit more encouragement from God. But with that said, this is an illustration of, once again, some simplicity of nature, where the Lord spoken to Moses and Aaron, telling them to be obedient, and them being obedient He told me that your rod is going to become a serpent. And they did exactly what they was told. They went to the Pharaoh and they demonstrated in front of Pharaoh and the servants, and it became a serpent. Um, Sometimes it's just that simple. When God's speaking to you and you know what you got to do. Sometimes it can be difficult. Sometimes it can be just like in Genesis 3, where God gave them something simple to do. They didn't want to listen. And so they took the fig leaves and they hide their shame. It could be like in Genesis 6, and talk speaking to Noah, and Noah took the wood, simplicity of the wood, and built an ark. He was obedient. One was shame, next one was obedient, and the last is the idea of being obedient as well in the form of trying to bring peace. And the Bible's, like I said, several illustrations of how the wood or types of wood, be it a tree or be it whatever, is used. It could be a wooden pulpit. It could be the idea of the cross from tree. It could be idea of the burning bush. It could be several illustrations. But for these three little applications, I took the idea of, like I said before, of listening or not listening, and how God can use something that we see as everyday things as an illustration to help us further be closer to God. Now, with all that said, we go on to the bonus verses, which is in Mark 11, verses 12 through 14 and 19 through 22. Now, in this section of this episode, I want you to keep the idea of, before there was obedience, there was not being obedient. And this section is the idea of listening. Because this is one of the parables in the Bible. Actually, it's not really a parable. It's more of a demonstration. In the parable idea of storytelling using factual things, but this one is more of an understanding of what the disciples actually seen, witnessed. So anyway, like I said, Mark 11, verses 12 through 14 and 19 through 22. And verse 12 reads, "And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if happily he might find anything thereon. And when he came to, he found nothing but leaves, but the time of the figs was not yet. And Jesus answered, saith unto it, No man eat fruit from the hereafter forever. And disciples heard it." I'm going to pause right there. This is the introduction of them leaving one place and going somewhere else. And like I said, this idea of the disciples heard what God said. God gave them a warning. This is a section of this episode of, you should not do what everybody else is doing. This is a warning. They heard the warning. This is the warning. The warning was they was going somewhere. They was hungry, and they seen something, but it wasn't fruitful. An idea many times used in the Bible, the fig tree represents human nature, how we should be bearing fruit, how we should be full of seeds, willing to get put somewhere in the ground or put in an environment and bring forth fruit for the future generations. Now, this is the introduction, I say, because in the next section, 19 through 22, is aftermath. Well, in between the introduction and the aftermath, it's where God went to the temple and how he was displeased, how he was upset. So this is what he's letting them know: do not partake on what you see. Despite you might be wanting an idea like them being hungry, you might be wanting desperately to get something from it. It's not necessarily always what you need. All right. I'll illustrate on that more. Anyway, you go into verse 19. It says, "And when evening was evening was come, he went out into the city." Verse 20 says, "And in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots." It says, verse 21, "And Peter called to remembrance, said unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursed is withered away. And Jesus answered, say unto them, he says, have faith in God." Now, this is the aftermath of God. This is the aftermath of Jesus Christ. And him and the disciples have left the temple, and the temple was disgraced. The temple was bad. All right, this is the aftermath, and it shows that, hey, they come by, hey, there's the fig tree again. It's dead. There's nothing there. And God says to them, have faith in God. He was saying that sometimes you got to kill off that stuff. Sometimes you got to restrain from it, and it'll be new growth after the fact. And this idea of the simplicity of the wood is the idea of how sometimes your environment is toxic. Sometimes the individuals around you are bad, but sometimes you got to be, actually not sometimes, all the time, you got to be cautious about what you're stepping into. Yeah, they might have been hungry, they might have been eager, might have been wanting to do something, but, and when like I said, when he got there, all he seen was leaves. It was just a big flash and show. It wasn't nothing that could withstand them, nothing that was beneficial to their journey. But after the fact, after they went through and seen how bad it was, they cleaned it up. It went on to the aftermath. Like I said, the next day, and they come by the same fig tree, and it was dead, and that's good. And sometimes situations have to die. Sometimes situations must end to have something better later on down the line. That's why I said before, in the Bible, many times the fig tree represents how we should be internally when it comes to the seed bearing, and it comes to being placed in an area, and how we should grow for future generations. Now, in this sense, that's what he said. When he said in the beginning, he said, no man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. It was saying, do not do, despite what you might be tempted, do not fall for it. Do not go along with the crowd. Do not go in here with your eyes bigger than your stomach. If your eyes gonna be big and paying attention. And that's what he said. And the disciples heard it. Disciples heard him say, hey, don't partake in it. You know when something is not right. You have what they say, a gut feeling or a notion. I try to harpen on the last bit of this podcast, bigger than the intro of the podcast, because this either part and all parts are equally important. But for this illustration, when it comes to the simplicity of nature, is more important of how God used the wood in the form of a fig tree, of how we should be warning about the situations that we put ourselves in. But once the situation is gone away, and the place has been cleaned up, and so it says, have faith in God. God can restore, God can build on it. But first, we personally have to get rid of stuff on our own. We have to let the situation die. Like I said, it had dried up from the roots. From the very bottom, from the top to the bottom, boom, it was gone. And that's what we have to do. We have to take the initiative to kill certain situations. We cannot continue feeding the beast that is going to kill us. We cannot continue feeding the situation, adding weight to the boat is we're going to drown in. I know it seemed kind of jumbled up, but try to sum all this stuff together, from the idea of the fig leaves hiding the shame to the next part where the gopher wood was following instructions and making an ark, Noah did, to save, preserve, as you will, and going on along with Exodus and it being obedient and following instructions, following the commands, casting down his rod and turning to a serpent. All of them are the simple things that we could do. Yes, Adam and Eve did wrong. Yes, they realized their shame, but all they had to the simplicity on that part was they should have just listened. Say, hey, you do anything you want in here, but don't take from that. They did. And Noah could have refused, but Noah could have, if he had refused, Noah would have been like the fate of everybody around him. He would have drowned. He would never carry on the legacy of what God had in the future. Aaron could have refused, not listened, and nobody would have been freed. They would have been still captive under Pharaoh. But in the bonus notes, the bonus verses, when it comes to not enjoying what everybody else is enjoying, the disciples could have went and say, "Oh, we're going to sit down here with the rest of them. It looks like fun." Sometimes it plays a big part in the future what you do today. If you say, like, if I get up from this podcast today and I go to sleep and I missed the opportunity of being prepared for the next day, that puts me behind. Like, I can probably make that up. But if I don't listen like Adam and Eve did, and then realize they got to suffer after the fact, say, like, I don't do what I need to prepare for one day, multiple days, it gets worse and worse, and it can lead into the idea of me losing my job. I'm not prepared to do my job. Or the idea of not following instructions, being prepared, or preserving, like Noah did, preserve the future. When he came to building the ark, if he didn't preserve the future, it could be we wouldn't never have the things we have today. And if Aaron was stubborn and didn't want to listen, or Moses was stubborn and he didn't want to listen, and Aaron never threw down his rod, it would never shown the power of God, and Pharaoh would took it as a joke. Same thing with the disciples. They heard him, and they could, like I said before, they could just knowing disregarded what he said, and they could have been victims of whatever happened at the temple that day. So, once again, with the title, Simplicity of Nature, God has his ways of showing us things. We should have our ways of listening and learning from them. And I highly recommend to do so. There's many different ways in these illustrations the wood was used, but just like I said in my previous podcast, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it might be a duck. But that's not the question. The question is, what kind of duck is it? From my house to yours, thank you.